So welcome everyone to Birth the New Earth, our series of online dialogues. We're here to explore how we can transform emergency at both the personal and the planetary, especially the planetary levels. So we're really here to help reframe our global crisis as an opportunity for the evolution of consciousness. We're also here very much to inspire and empower you to step into your quantum leadership, whether that's your inner leader or your outer leader, so that you can really embrace your soul's deepest calling and be part of our collective awakening. I'm Catherine G. Lucas, your host. I'm the author of 4 books on harnessing the transformational power of crisis. And I'm also the founder of Co-Creating Our Future, through which I offer online group programs. And I'm delighted to welcome our guests today, Caroline Myss, Andrew Harvey, and I'm also joined by my colleague, Paul Levy. So I feel that our guests hardly need any introduction because their work is so well known, but I am just going to say just a few words. So Caroline, I know that you've been a New York Times best-selling author 5 times, which is a fabulous accolade, and across themes ranging from consciousness to mysticism, energy medicine, medical intuition, and so much more. And I also understand that your institute, Caroline Myss Education, has been up and running for nearly 20 years. So that's a fabulous contribution that you're making through that. And your most recent book is Intimate Conversations with the Divine.
Yes.
So welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Lovely to be here and with these wonderful colleagues and friends. So thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome. And Andrew, I've been a fan of your work for many years also. I went on retreat at one point for a month and I literally just took 2 books, and your book on sacred activism, The Hope, was one of those. And you had me in tears on several occasions. I think your words just touching me so deeply, really. And I know that you're also very prolific as a writer, a poet, and translator. You've got over 40 books in publication. Extraordinary, including several with Carolyn Baker. And you're also pretty busy as a teacher of mysticism, traveling around the world. And I gather that you've also taught a lot of courses with the Shift Network, like 20-something courses. So yeah, that's quite a record. And your latest book is Radical Regeneration, Birthing the New Human in the Age of Extinction, and which is also all of you, your work is going to be so relevant to our conversation today. So welcome, Andrew.
My pleasure, my joy, and it's such. Paul did a wonderful introduction to Radical Regeneration, very generously. So thank you, Paul. An indispensable friend. So it's wonderful to be.
Good. And Paul, you and I both come from the field of spiritual emergence. I know you describe yourself as a wounded healer in private practice. And I know you've also kind of built a wonderful community in Portland where you live, this Awakening in the Dream community. And I also happen to know that you too are very prolific with your writing like 365 days of the year. And your books include Dispelling Wetiko and The Quantum Revelation.
Brilliant.
With a new book coming out this December, which is very exciting. Wetiko, Healing the Mind Virus That Plagues Our World. So yeah, welcome.
Yeah, I'm just so happy to be here. Thank you, Catherine, really.
Yeah. So So, we could not have more perfect speakers for our theme today, the dark night of the globe. Obviously this term, the Dark Night, originally comes from the work of St. John of the Cross. And we have here world experts on mysticism and also on Jung. And, we've seen this dark night of the globe coming for decades. And yet the pandemic has somehow really brought it into focus. So what I'd love to start with is just starting more at the personal level. So I'd love to ask each of you to just briefly share like a snippet of your personal journey of transformation and how you see that your story relating to the bigger story of our times and the dark night, our theme of the dark night. So Paul, maybe we could start with you on this one.
Sure. Yeah, no, I can speak about that for hours, but just in essence, so I had this huge awakening, in 1981 that almost killed me. But right within 24 hours, I got thrown in mental hospitals and misdiagnosed. And that was, in a way, the start of my dark night and a real descent into the underworld of the unconscious. And I was fortunate to not get caught in that, but to be able to go through it and to have the realization that that was part of the awakening instead of an error that got in the way of the awakening. And I guess the one thing I want to say is that one of the things that I've understood is that my process, and not just my process, but all of our processes, it's like it's an iteration on the personal level of the collective process. So collectively as a species, we're going through a dark night of the soul. And each of us as microcosms are actually going through our own version of that.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. And I know that place, having ended up in hospital myself when I was going through my own spiritual emergency. It's a tough place. It's a painful place. And kind of like the macrocosm is the suffering that we're seeing globally at the moment. So Caroline, maybe we could come to you next. You could share just a little bit of your personal journey of transformation.
I think my journey is, I suppose a little, I evolved, I think, through my work as a medical intuitive, which is an occupation I never heard of, and I have a genius for something I have no interest in, and a passion to do something I have no talent for, which is to be a fiction author. So, I think no, really, I think the combination, as I'm really beginning to understand now, gave me the capacity to live in the observational mode most of my life, and all of my life, and because of that, being a medical intuitive, I found that to be the most extraordinary classroom, because having come out of graduate school in theology, I really thought I had a handle on how this world was constructed with God, only to discover the soul as a medical intuitive and the complexity and the consciousness of the soul. And I thought, why didn't you tell me about this? And so here I go with a blank slate in my head, and it was like falling down a mystical rabbit hole and discovering the mechanism of co-creation and and having not been taught anything. I didn't even know about chakra. I knew nothing. And I would get these impressions of how we work and how we lose. And then I realized that power was the fundamental ingredient of the human experience. And then I got the whole, the visions I would have. And then my wiring, you went into the hospital, I went into epilepsy. And bam, my wiring got fried. But it was every single time my vision got clearer and clearer and clearer. And I thought I was getting cosmically electrocuted. And then it stopped. But after that, my clarity here became great, but my capacity to feel any connection to ordinary life was diminishing. It was just diminishing. I was becoming a macro being while losing the micro. I didn't want to, but I knew it was happening. I knew it. And I thought, all right, I'll play along with this because I have no other place to go. And that's when I sensed that what I now call organic divinity was evolving. And I could see that I was taking notes on what I would call the biospiritual ecological theology, that all life breathes together. And I could see that God was law, that this universe is organized through the laws of God in an impersonal way. But what made it personal was prayer. What made it intimate. So it is impersonal and it is deeply intimate.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Caroline, for sharing that. Because I think, the epilepsy, I can see how that's your kind of like, yeah, that's the awakening process in a different kind of iteration of it.
Well, it's called the mystic's disorder.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
And then it stopped when the
and
wire.
To Teresa, didn't it? It brought you to Teresa became your
Brought me Teresa of Avila.
Yeah, and actually, I just share for a moment when I was studying your book, Entering the Castle, your interpretation of her teachings, and also reading her material, I actually started to experience the paralysis that she experienced. I mean, it was phenomenal. It would have been terrifying if it hadn't been for the fact that I recognized the phenomenon, if you like. So Andrew, maybe we could come to you. You could share just a little bit of your journey of maybe, I don't know, a pivotal moment or a kind of dark night.
Well, for me, my dark night is the central experience of my life and the most terrifying and the most amazing. What happened was that I was the chief devotee of an Indian woman whom I worshipped as the Divine Mother, but who turned out to be power drunk and homophobic. And this shattered my whole life. She denied that she had tried to separate me from my partner. My life was plunged for 3 years into absolute horror. People threw bombs through my window, people spat at us in the streets. I was denounced as the Antichrist, which is wonderful to be denounced as the Antichrist. At least it was a high honor. And my husband nearly died of cancer, and my reputation was shredded, and I was humiliated. And it went on and on and on and on. What was absolutely amazing about the experience was that in the middle of the horror, I turned to the Divine Mother as Mary and opened my soul to her and begged her to protect me. And she did a series of what I can only call miracles. Her icons wept, rose, her rose filled the house. She organized us to escape from what seemed like impossible and terrifying conditions. And my dark night actually ended as classical dark nights do. And this is what you find if you read Teresa or St. John of the Cross or Rumi. My dark night ended with a vision of the Christ when my father was dying in a church in Coimbatore, which began sacred activism. So from this truly horrific experience, I learned 3 things. I learned that the dark night is savage grace. It's the process in which your delusions are burnt away in the most atrocious way so that you can be born into illusionless reality, the organic divinity that Carolyn was talking about. That's the first thing I learned. The second thing I learned is that all of those who are doing important work in the world now have all been through their version of the dark night to prepare them to guide and sustain people through this universal dark night that we're living through, and to model what can be born out of this radical death. I believe we're in an evolutionary mutation, and that's why it's so savage, but that if we can align ourselves with the laws of the dark night, these impersonal laws that Carolyn has described, we can also be reborn in a very different state, an embodied divine humanity, which I'm experiencing the fringes of the fringes of. And the third thing I learned through my own dark night experience was precisely that this was an evolutionary experience. The mystics of all the traditions have always known that there is a moment when your sincerity on the path is rewarded not by appearing on Oprah every week or Malibu Mansions, but by being killed personally by the divine. In Sufism, the great hadith of the Prophet is selected as the exemplum of this. And in this hadith, which really describes the whole process in a devastating way, Allah says, "When I have found you sincere, I will kill you personally. And because I am killing you personally, I will pay the blood money, and what I will give you is myself." So the murder that takes place at the full self during the dark night process is a divinely ordained murder and a divinely prescribed murder. And God pays the blood money for the crime, himself, herself, and what God gives you is the next level of your evolutionary truth, as he's given it to Paul, as he's given it to Carrigan. So my message to the world now is, we are not going to get out of this dark night. We have to go through it, and we have to allow it to shatter us completely, to destroy the structures that are no longer working, to incinerate the illusions that are keeping us prisoners of separation and hubris and power. And if we can stand the intensity of such a devastating process and keep praying and keep meditating and keep serving, there is an extraordinary possibility that a global birth of a new kind of humanity, the kind of birth that's taken place in Paul and Carolyn and in myself in different ways, can take place on an extraordinary level to really take us to the next level of our evolutionary collaboration with God.
Yeah.
So I know this.
Yeah.
And the poem, I'd just like to quote a poem, which is the whole process, because this is what I would love everybody listening to really get with. And I know Carolyn loves this poem because we've talked about it many times. Rumi went through his own dark night, and it didn't kill him. It birthed the greatest poet the world has ever seen and one of the greatest sublime teachers the world's ever seen. And he was my constant companion in my dark night. And this is the poem I live by. And it goes like this. The grapes of my body can only become wine when the trampler tramps them complete. I surrender my body like grapes to his trampling, so my inmost heart can blaze and dance with joy. And although the grapes go on sobbing blood and screaming, I cannot bear any more anguish. I cannot bear any more cruelty. The trampler stuffs cotton in his ears and says, "It is I who am the master of this work. You can deny me if you want. You have every excuse, but I am not working in ignorance. And when, through my passion, you reach perfection, you will never be done praising my name." That's the whole process in one astounding poem. And that's the process that I believe the whole world is now being plunged into at a visceral apocalyptic level.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrew, so much. And actually, what you've done, you've kind of taken us from the personal to the kind of collective.
There is no separation.
Well,
As
exactly.
Paul said, everybody is going through this, and those of us who chose to be here at this time, who are destined to do really radical transformative work, have all had to suffer immensely a very profound shattering so that we could be remade and so that we could take people through the shattering and say, don't despair, hold on, pray. let God kill you and rebirth you. Amazing new possibilities arise.
Yeah. And I think there's several things that I want to pick up on there. On the one hand, you mentioned the intensity, and we know that it's phenomenally intense. At the microcosmic and the macrocosmic, and there's worse, if you like, and better to come. It's going to get far more challenging. I think, I love what you were just saying about don't despair. This is very much, I think, we want people to be able to have that glimmer of hope of the new dawn. The dark night is followed by the dawn, even though we need to acknowledge the suffering really fully. I think maybe...
Fully, yeah.
Yeah, and there's something also for me about, at the personal level, it's kind of like there's an ego death. And yet what we're seeing, with the pandemic and the sixth mass extinction is a physical death as well. And so, maybe we can speak to this a little bit and look at, where do we... Yeah, I think this is what I'd like to ask each of you is maybe, Caroline, maybe we can come to you next. What's your take on where we find ourselves collectively now? In terms of the global dark night?
Well, first, I want to say that I believe you have to answer these kinds of questions that you're asking almost as if they're a layer cake or a building, and what floor do you want to answer it on? I mean, if you're on the first floor, it's going to be a chaotic answer where you're seeing everything fall apart, but I don't look at it that way. So I go up to a much higher altitude. And from that, I look through the lens of essential transformation. And because the dark night's not a punishment, right. It's a journey. And I do believe that we began this journey when we entered the nuclear age. When we created the means to destroy our own planet, and we lacked the moral and ethical, strategic interior to not use the weapons, but rather we encouraged the appetite to use the weapons. So we fell off the rails of our own humanity. And so that ignited a spiritual acceleration program, so to speak, a consciousness, Alex said, and we've fallen off the rails of that. And so we could sense for the last decades that something was in the air, because we knew that the new template was holism. We got that in our body, we got that in medicine, but nobody wanted to actually activate it in the ground. Not in policies, not in finances, not in anything. In fact, it's repugnant to people. And so the major catalyst for change in our world historically has been war, but we can't afford war anymore. We can't even use that word, we use conflicts. So the pandemic is actually a catalyst that we've been anticipating something. Something was coming. And this is brilliant. It's organic. It's divine organics. It is, we have an epidemic of narcissism that says, I want my own space. Well, now you've got your own space. How do you like it? Now you have all the space you want. And now people are screaming, I can't get me. They're craving community. And the number of people that are leaving the planet due to the pandemic are nothing compared to what would happen if we'd have nuclear war. Nothing. People leave the planet all the time. There's always death. This is not a crisis for me. It's not a dark night. It's a dark night if we don't get it. It's a dark night if we don't get it. What a dark night is for me is that if you don't get what's going on, people are grinding it's a war in good and evil as far as I'm concerned, where darkness is locking in and pulling people thinking that they can stop the progression toward holism. And
Wow.
then there's then there's holism. And so it's really the solar, SOULAR. And the solar, the light is pulling against the dark. And the dark is saying, we're not going there. The five sensory world is trying very hard to turn down the awakening of a multi-sensory species. And the multi-sensory species is also trying to shut itself down, because opening up your intuitive is reopening your conscience. And it is the conscience in people that has been shut down, that metronome that says, I know right from wrong, good from evil. And there have been huge alliances with darkness. People think lying is normal. So when you talk about a dark night, what are you talking about? From my point of view, the dark night is that people have negotiated with darkness and they like it.
I figure.
Yeah. Yeah. And Paul, I think you can follow on very nicely there.
Yeah, no,
for us.
that I can
Yeah.
segue into that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, I just want to point out that we're in the middle of this of a collective psychosis.
Oh.
And part of the collective psychosis is that everybody thinks it's normal, and no one's really talking about that our species has gone collectively insane.
Thank you.
One way of understanding that is, take a look at what we're doing to the biosphere, the life support, the system of the planet. We're destroying it.
Thank you.
And yeah, no, totally. And it's like, and what I'm continually pointing at is that the origin and the solution of that collective psychosis is to be found within our psyches. And as long as we actually think the solution, or the source of the problem is outside of ourselves, then we disassociated ourselves from where the solution actually lies. And part of that collective psychosis is that we're having a confrontation with the dark, with evil. And that's such a charged word, and people don't like to mention it. But if we don't come to terms with evil, then we don't stand a chance. And I point out in my work that encoded within the darkness, hidden within the darkness, it's actually teaching us something. It's showing us something. And if we don't really understand what is actually being reflected through the darkness, and keep in mind, as the darkness is playing out in the world, that's actually an expression of that very darkness in ourselves. And what I also point out is that encoded in that evil, in that darkness, in the shadow, both the archetypal and the personal shadow, is our creative spirit, that each of us have this genius. We're creative geniuses. And we have this power right now, and we're implementing it 24/7. But to the extent that we're not aware that we're wielding it, it gets turned against us in a way where we're destroying ourselves. And that the powers that be are more than happy to pick up our creative agency for us. And then we just feel helpless and victimized and all of that. So the thing that I actually continually point at is that the solution for all of the myriad crises that are converging in our world is for each one of us to connect with who we are, and who we are these creative beings.
Yeah.
And as we get in touch with who we are, well, because our nature is to be creative, then we step into being consciously creative beings. And the more we consciously create, the more we get to know who we are in a positive feedback loop. And when we connect with other people who are also doing that, that's when all bets are off.
You know, one of the reasons I recoil at referring to this as a collective dark night is because it sounds like we're blaming God for this. That the universe has sent us on this collective dark night, and oh my, are we suffering? When in fact this is our doing.
Right.
This is all our doing, and this is our doing because the truth is, the holy, ugly truth is that people prefer the companionship of the dark to the light. They prefer it. And that is something that, in order to get to the point you just described, Paul, is that co-creation is the name of the game here. Co-creation, that's what the soul is all about. It's the co-creative engine. And that darkness has all the advantage over light. Light is not sexy. The light is not glamorous. The light comes in and it cleans up the shrapnel that darkness creates. But darkness is in a person is thrilling. Light has privacy, darkness has secrets, and it's thrilling. And that's why when someone gets up and they know in the morning, I'm going to lie, but the truth scares them. We have therapists to get people to tell the truth and be kind, but nobody needs a therapist to be angry and lie. It comes easy as pie. And that should say it all. And when you tell someone, it's effortless to be an addict, but to get someone off of it and to get someone into clarity and to listen to the intuition that says, tell the truth, be kind. One of the most difficult things in the world for someone is to empower another person, to actually help elevate their power. Or they can give them $5, but to actually empower them, to actually, what do we have in this society now is, people can't even think about helping the poor or helping raise them from the drugs. It's terrifying to have this country. Because if I give you power, I won't have power. It doesn't even occur to them that a rising tide lifts all ships, or that what is in one is in the whole. What I do to the least, I do to everybody. They don't get the laws of the universe. And so they work against it and think I have to figure out ways to disempower you. And off they go with their creativity.
And thank you, Caroline. Andrew, I wonder if you'd like to come in here at this point.
Well, I agree with everything that's been said, but I would add one thing. I think that one of the essential forms of creativity that we desperately need to connect with is what I call sacred activism. First, we have to find out who we are through prayer and meditation, the real deathless divine self. Second, we have to do what Carolyn is truly challenging us to do. We have to acknowledge that through our training, we become addicted to lying and the dark, and it's easier to do that than to live the new life of conscience and truth that is being revealed to us as the life that we must lead. And if anybody who doesn't confront their shadow and the shadow of the world that they've been brought up in is going to be incinerated in this crisis. Thirdly, we have to really take up what Paul is so brilliantly describing in his books. His books on Wetiko should be indispensable really for everyone. Because what he's saying is that the world has been polluted by a collective psychosis, but that within the psychosis itself is a thwarted, distorted creativity, whose powers need to be released in service of a growing light consciousness. But the fourth part is very, very important. And that's the part that I've been tirelessly trying to bring in, which is that we are facing multiple exploding crises which really do threaten human extinction. We're facing a potential massive extinction event soon. There is a collapsing climate, which is far, far worse than the doomsayers have said. It's now everywhere exploding. There is a pandemic, which is not under any control, which could be followed by far worse pandemics. There is a crisis of animal massacre, a genocide of the animals, 1 million species hanging on the verge of extinction. There is a crisis of democracy all over the world and the rising of authoritarian fascist governments, which would make impossible any sane, holistic, global solution to anything. And there is a massive spiritual crisis because the religions have failed us. We've been fed fake, disgusting, stupid mysticism by the New Age. And very few people, as as it is now, are prepared to do the kind of work that Carolyn is talking about, the kind of work of really shifting your whole being from a secret addiction to the dark to a deep commitment to the light. The New Age just talked about it as if it was easy. In fact, it requires a death and constant choice. But so all of those crises are exploding all at once, and they threaten the death of the human race and a great deal of nature. The only thing that can get us through is a combination of deep, deep shadow work, profound mystical prayer and meditation, and this is so important, and a really brave commitment in the core of all of our lives to use what we're discovering of the potential creativity of our new selves and put it into radical, inspired, non-violent, but very urgent action. Greta Thunberg is someone whom I enormously admire, and I follow her. And just last week, she said, if you think that the world is going to really make the changes necessary for getting to terms with climate change in this Glasgow conference that's going to happen in the autumn, you are utterly mad. She said, I've met all the world leaders, I've talked to all of them, they all celebrate me, they give me medals, and I can tell you right now that they are utterly incapable of making the shifts necessary because they're all in the old thinking and they're all in the pay of various corporations. So get over that and realize that the only thing that can shift anything is putting love and compassion and conscience into concerted, wise, radical, urgent action that really says a resounding no to the past and a yes to a very fragile potential future. Let's get real about it.
Yeah,
I have to add one word. I've got to add one word to what Andrew said because it's important. Sacrifice.
Sacrifice.
It's not love we need. We need sacrifice.
We need both.
We need, but love is sacrifice, Andrew.
Yes,
which is being willing to sacrifice your comfort, sacrifice your own lifestyle, sacrifice what it is, your the way you thought you needed to live and pare down, so that to live small. To change your lifestyle in order to live what you know to be the truth. When Paul was talking about his journey into madness, for me, one of the causes of madness, and that Paul, I'd really want you to comment on this, is that when the soul is an instrument that is wired for truth. It's wired for truth. And it when the soul perceives truth and it cannot communicate truth, when it is around hypocrisy and the brain, especially when the person has the ethical wiring and stamina to say, I can't compromise what I'm witnessing from what I know to be the truth, that can cause a kind of what the outside world would call as madness. It's almost as if you have to shut down because your clarity has no way of processing how you are actually receiving so much data. But the difference between the clarity that you're perceiving and the world you're in, we don't have that, how do I say, that moat that you can absorb the trash, that to process the illusions.
Yeah, if I can comment on that, Carolyn, because when I remember clearly when I had my awakening, there are a couple of ways I can describe it. And one way is I was realizing, oh my God, this is a dream. We're having a collectively shared dream. And I'm not talking as this metaphor. I'm talking just like being in a dream at night and thinking that it's real. And then all of a sudden having lucidity and recognizing, oh my God, this dream verse that I'm in is I'm not separate from it. I'm actually dreaming it up, and we're all dreaming it up, and I'm being dreamed up by it. And the other way of describing that is to realize, oh my God, who I thought I was as a separate self. This is just a model for who I am. This is not who I am. Everybody in the dream, they're characters in my dream, like I'm a character in their dream. Just like you have a dream at night and in the morning when you wake up and you contemplate all the dream characters, well, they're aspects of yourself, which is to say that we're all interconnected. And so that was the major felt sense that I was having during the awakening, that, oh my God, we're actually interdependent. There's no separate self to be found anywhere. We're interconnected. And I was 24 years old, and I was so excited at what I was realizing. I couldn't possibly have been prepared for the overwhelmingness of the realization that I was so, I had this excitement, I would like and theos, and I was enthusiastic, which means to be filled with spirit. But from the outside world, people in the mainstream, it looked like I had just had a radical personality change and I was having a psychotic break. And so they didn't know anything other than to just pathologize me and to lock me up and medicate me and all that. And, I was fortunate to not get stuck in that. But that experience of seeing through the imagination that we exist in a way that we don't, i.e. as a separate self, and to have your eyes open and to realize, oh my God, we're all parts of one another. And the expression of that realization is compassion. And so it's funny because I was saying this exact stuff 40 years ago when I got locked up, whereas now I've developed more of a skillful way of saying it so that I don't get locked up, actually. At least I hope. Yeah, totally. So that's,
Yeah. No, that's fabulous. Thank you, Paul. And I think in terms of,
I would like to say something.
Yeah, absolutely, Andrew.
I would like to pick up on what Carolyn so brilliantly said and what Paul has just said. Carolyn, by saying sacrifice, has laid has really taken the photograph of the elephant in the room. I have spent 30 years in this ghastly spiritual world trying to warn people about what was going to happen. And I was marginalized and treated as a lunatic. And I was even more marginalized and treated as a lunatic because I was constantly saying, it's not just a question of waking up in the wonderful way that Paul described. It's a question of actually putting that realization into action.
Yeah.
And action is going to cost you. It's going to cost you your persona. It's going to make you enemies. I've had all sorts of people say the most appalling things, and I've got a whole stash of emails, which I'm going to publish one day because they make me laugh every time I read them. And if you're going to stand up for interdependence and compassion, you're going to have to risk your life. And in my case, I did risk my life because I had 3 years of death threats. I had bombs thrown through my window when I stood up against my guru, and I had appalling venom directed at me, and I wanted to die many times, and I wanted to give up, and actually I also wanted to lie. I wanted to say it hadn't happened. But something in me, which was my passion for God, kept me adamant. So I know what it is to sacrifice one's life for what you believe, and I try to model that in the whole of my life, and it's very hard, and I fail. But you cannot go out with a message of the birth, the birth, the birth, without saying to people that they're going to have to do 3 things. They're going to have to let this explosion of their own darkness, as we call the dark night, Carolyn's right about that, you're going to have to let that kill your false self. You're going to have to plunge very much more deeply than you ever have into mystical practice, which will reveal to you what Paul is describing, the interdependence of everything. And then you are going to have to sacrifice urgently. And now, as the climate collapses, as the species die, as the oceans get totally polluted, as people choose fascism, you're going to have to be the one with your wild and humble friends to step out there and say, I am prepared to risk my reputation, my life, my money, my resources, everything to stand up for the possibility of something. Otherwise, if you go out with a message that's any less urgent or bladed than that, you're just pampering the wretched new age fantasies that are part of the reason why we've got to this disgusting and obscene, but also amazing place that we're in.
Thank you, Andrew. And yeah, I mean, it feels like we've moved on, but when you talked about Greta Thunberg earlier, you know, I'm really encouraged to see groups like Extinction Rebellion, who have really taken on board the sacred. You know, that is sacred activism.
Right.
You know,
Yes.
not everybody knows that Gail Bradbrook kind of, you know, it was through an ayahuasca ceremony that she downloaded the codes of social reform. So you know, we have
Well,
these.
Greta and I talked. She talks a great deal of what she calls cathedral spirit. She's had her own revelations, which she's never talked about, but which she has impelled her out of passion and love to stand up. Her parents thought she was crazy, but she didn't stop. She's not stopping. And there are hundreds of thousands of people like that on the earth, but they sure as hell aren't amongst most of my pupils. And most of the people listening still want a solution that God is somehow going to arrange. We've got to collaborate and co-create by giving up our lives.
And this is it. And I think in terms of that non-local, in terms of the quantum, in terms of our power to co-create, this is what we need to kind of really kind of embrace and embody
And that's what quantum
understand.
physics, and that's what quantum physics is pointing at. I mean, in my book on quantum physics, I point out that it's the medicine, that the insights that are emerging, that quantum physics is freely offering us. It's the medicine for the madness, because it's actually showing us, it's empirically proving in a way that we're having a dream, but that the way that we observe this reality is actually influencing this reality, that there's no separation. And that's to say that the act of observation is creative. It's pointing at that incredible creative agency and power that we're unconscious of. And if we don't, you know, become awake to that, like we've all been saying, you know, then it gets turned against us in a destructive way.
Okay, if someone said to you, Paul, give me an example of how to become awake. And let's go to the how question.
Yeah, right, okay.
How do we?
Yeah, and that's a trick question in a certain way. But right when you asked that, I thought, okay, the place to do it is right now, in the present moment. You know, we think that we need to figure it out with our mind, that it's somewhere in the future, or we need to contemplate something in the past. No, then you know, that's to be off. But the idea is that each and every moment, we're creating our experience of ourselves, and we are creating our experience of the world. And so that's the portal. When you bring awareness to that, you begin.
How? No. How? I want you to go into the how. You're just describing the same thing again. Give me a how, because this is how we ground it.
Right. Okay. And I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to answer that, except to say that when we enter the present moment and actually bring awareness to our present experience, we see how we are actually complicit and we're co-creating the very experience we're having, that it's not happening to us. We're not passive, we're not victims, we're not helpless, but we actually are participating in the evocation and the creation of our present moment experience. That's the doorway. And I'm not sure what else to say.
Here.
We do need to wrap up. We do need to wrap up.
But not till I say this. Paul, all you have to do is tell someone, stop and watch the vocabulary you're using. Your vocabulary is power. Are you going to use an angry word here? Okay, just watch the word you use and how it changes the power climate in the room. Start with observing the power of your words.
Right, and can I just say one thing about that? I mean, how do you make a word? You spell it, because you're talking about that we're continually casting spells on ourselves and on each other all the time. But to bring awareness to that, instead of casting a spell where we're, keeping each other in, in this asleep way, we can cast spells that are helping each other, that are empowering
Precisely,
each other.
exactly.
Yeah,
The
right.
power of our words are our
Right.
tools.
Right,
Great.
exactly.
Thank you, everyone. To wrap up, I really want to, just a final word from each of you in terms of, really thinking about those who are kind of watching this, a message for those who kind of really want to, who want to kind of step into kind of contributing to the new story, to the new earth, to our non-local kind of quantum understanding. What message do you have for someone who's wanting to kind of step up in some way? Andrew, let's start with you. And we need to keep this brief, I'm afraid.
Ask yourself deeply what breaks your heart the most about what's happening, and really find out, and then step up, armed by meditation and prayer and deep responsibility for the words you use and true conscience, to do something real about it right now.
Thank you, Andrew. Caroline.
I would say to everybody, ask yourself, what was I born for? Was I born to make this world a better place, and in what way? And I would start with, I need to make every day a little bit better, and it's the way I treat others, and it's the way I speak the truth. Every day I need to simply honor truth, and the rest will build from there.
Beautiful. Thank you. Paul.
Yeah, and so I think of quantum physics. It's offering us, you see, if people get caught in feeling despair or depressed or pessimistic, and then as soon as you get caught in that viewpoint, you're going to draw all the evidence, being like a dream, to confirm your viewpoint, and then in a self-perpetuating feedback loop, you're actually part of the problem. But quantum physics is saying at each and any moment there is, these practically infinite possibilities, and some of them are such that our species, that there might be sufficient people in our world that are awakening, that contributes to the collective unconscious actually waking up, and that's an actual possibility. And if we're not envisioning that, then I would ask, like, what are we thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And, I just really want to thank, Caroline, Andrew, Paul, fabulous. I feel like we've had a really lively kind of animated, and you shared your kind of your wisdom, your insights. And I know that our audience are going to be taking away so much from this very rich conversation. And just finally, for those of you watching, if you want to read some of Paul's fabulous articles and get notification of the release of his new book on Wetiko, then I highly recommend that you sign up to his mailing list. And also Caroline and Andrew both have wonderful and very generous free resources available on their websites. So again, sign up for those. And yeah, thank you for being with us today as we explore, as we tussle with, how do we birth the new earth? And yeah, that's all for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.